Under the bright glow of the studio lights, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood confidently, her maroon suit catching the light just enough to betray her calm assurance as she prepared to confront one of the most distinguished and formidable legal minds in the United States. Moments before, Alan Dershowitz, the legendary 85-year-old Harvard Law School professor emeritus and a lawyer whose reputation stretched across decades, had stepped onto the stage from behind the curtains. Clutched tightly in his hand was a stack of meticulously organized papers, which he seemed to hold with purpose and authority. His facial expression was composed, yet resolute, as if he carried the weight of countless courtroom battles behind his calm demeanor. Earlier, the background hum of anticipation grew louder as the tension in the studio became palpable. The person behind this strategic confrontation, Durowitz, had made a declaration, a statement that echoed through the nerve-racked silence. He confidently asserted that he possessed concrete evidence capable of exposing what he believed was a glaring deficiency in the Congresswoman's grasp of legal intricacies. His voice remained steady, resonating with the calm authority of a veteran who had argued before the Supreme Court on many occasions. His assertiveness was underlined by his reputation. An accomplished lawyer, high-profile advocate, and seasoned professional who was unfazed by the intimidating surroundings. He proclaimed that although Crockett might be considered a rising star within her political party, tonight's debate would reveal her to be significantly out of her depth when it came to constitutional law and legal nuances. The audience, sensing the gravity of the moment, instinctively reached for their phones, eager to record this encounter, knowing that it was likely to become a defining moment in their political consciousness. They understood that this was more than just a routine debate. It was a battle of reputation, intellect, and the ability to navigate complex legal arguments under intense scrutiny. With decades of experience behind him, bolstered by his Harvard pedigree, a distinguished career, and work with prominent clients, Durowitz appeared utterly confident that he would secure an easy victory over the relatively new Congresswoman, who had only been serving in Congress for a brief 2 years. His belief in his own superiority seemed rooted in the conviction that his extensive background gave him an insurmountable edge. Yet, Crockett remained utterly unfazed by his bravado. A former public defender and civil rights attorney, she stood with poise, her expression calm yet alert, a subtle and knowing smile flickering on her face. Her eyes locked onto his with piercing intent, revealing her internal preparation and resolve. It was obvious to those familiar with her that she had come well prepared, knowing exactly the battlefield she was about to face. This confrontation was no ordinary debate. It was poised to become one of the most challenging moments in Dershowitz's long and illustrious career. When the cameras of CNN began rolling, capturing every moment for the nationwide audience, the tension only intensified. The host, Rebecca Mitchell, introduced the segment, making clear that this discussion would center on voting rights legislation, a topic of immense importance and relevance. Neither Crockett nor Durowitz looked away as they engaged in a fierce, unwavering stare-down, each holding the other's gaze as if testing the depth of their resolve. It was in this moment that the veteran legal scholar, confident in his years of experience and intellectual mastery, was about to learn an unforgettable lesson. Underestimating Jasmine Crockett's sharpness, determination, and strategic acumen would prove to be his most costly mistake on national television. Each second of this exchange was poised to demonstrate that beneath her relatively short time in Congress lay an acute awareness of the nuances of law, a fierce commitment to her principles, and a tactical brilliance that even seasoned legal giants could overlook. Before diving into the unfolding drama, it's important to recognize the importance of the battle of wits that was about to take place. Watching how Jasmine Crockett skillfully turned the tables on one of America's most celebrated attorneys would be a lesson in composure, preparation, and strategic thinking. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a masterclass in asserting oneself against a formidable opponent. The CNN studio was charged with anticipation. The host, Rebecca Mitchell, set the stage for what was expected to be a compelling debate about voting rights, a topic vital to the nation's democracy. As she introduced the two legal luminaries, the atmosphere grew even more tense. On one side was Harvard Law School professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz, with his distinguished background, polished appearance, and an impressive career that included arguing before the Supreme Court. His silver hair was carefully combed, and he dressed in a crisply tailored navy suit that exuded professional authority and expertise. At the age of nearly 85, he carried the weight of decades filled with academic influence, courtroom victories, and high-profile legal battles, ranging from defending notorious clients like O.J. Simpson to dealing with complex cases involving Jeffrey Epstein. Dershowitz's face bore a resolute expression, signaling his readiness to dominate the discussion. He had not come to merely participate. He had come to win. His voice, deep and commanding, introduced his opening remarks with a subtle hint of his Boston accent, the unmistakable mark of a seasoned lawyer whose career spanned generations. From the moment he began speaking, it was clear that he intended to assert his authority, to steer the debate according to his terms, and to leave no doubt about his commanding legal acumen. As the segment progressed, the scene was set for an intense clash of ideas and perspectives on a topic that was crucial to the future of American democracy. The audience watched with anticipation, aware that they were witnesses to a pivotal moment where experience and youthful vigor, tradition and innovation, collided in a high-stakes arena of political and legal rhetoric. I believe that the public truly deserves to hear from someone who possesses genuine understanding and a deep familiarity with the intricate complexities of the law, someone who does not merely recite prepared lines or obscure legal jargon, but who can genuinely elucidate the complex legal landscape that surrounds such legislation. The unmistakable condescension that resonated in his tone was impossible to overlook. It was as if he believed himself to be the sole bearer of enlightenment in an otherwise darkened room filled with ordinary citizens. As he shuffled through a stack of papers with hesitating movements, he deliberately highlighted specific sections of the bill, referencing past court rulings, legal precedents, and statutes, all of which appeared to serve as props designed to bolster his perceived authority and credibility. These gestures seemed carefully chosen to project an image of mastery, as if to say, "Here is the irrefutable proof of my undeniable expertise." Across the polished table sat Crockett. Her demeanor remained controlled and composed, exuding confidence as she sat with her maroon suit impeccably tailored. The subtle glint of her gold necklace catching the studio's bright lights added a touch of understated elegance, a characteristic reflection of her personality. At the age of 43, this Yale-educated attorney had crafted her reputation through a different path, not by mingling in elite, exclusive circles of influence, but by fiercely defending the interests and rights of ordinary Americans. Her career had begun by standing up for individuals and communities often overlooked or underestimated, and only later had she stepped into the political arena, ultimately securing her seat in Congress. Her facial expression was calm and measured, but beneath that tranquil exterior lurked a razor-sharp legal mind that had earned her numerous victories within courtrooms where opponents often tried to dismiss her as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. Her track record demonstrated resilience and intelligence, qualities that had repeatedly turned the tide in her favor against adversaries who thought her outsider status or her gender would make her an easy target. With a steady voice, Crockett initiated the discussion, addressing the audience directly. "Good evening." Her speech was even and measured, carrying a subtle undertone that hinted at her Texas roots, an accent that added warmth and authenticity to her words. Unlike some, I am not here to lecture Americans from a lofty, detached ivory tower, she continued. My purpose today is to speak plainly about legislation, laws that have profound implications for real people, the voters I have long represented both inside the courtroom and now inside the halls of Congress. Her words aimed to connect with ordinary viewers, emphasizing her commitment to practical impacts rather than abstract legal technicalities. Rebecca Mitchell, sitting nearby, nodded attentively, clearly sensing the escalating tension in the room. Her intuition told her that a crucial moment was approaching. Let's start with the basics, she suggested, her tone steady yet inviting. Professor Durowitz, an esteemed legal scholar, had previously characterized this bill as an unconstitutional overreach, a charge that carried significant weight given his reputation. On the other side, Crockett found herself not only defending the bill, but also co-sponsoring it, placing her directly in the crossfire of the controversy. The question now was, what was truly at stake in this debate? Before Crockett could respond, Dershowitz leaned forward, his posture eager and assertive. What is at stake here, he declared confidently, is nothing less than the delicate constitutional balance of power that our entire nation depends upon. His voice carried the conviction of someone who believed he was defending the very core of the American legal system. The Congresswoman and her colleagues, he continued, are pushing for federal control over areas that the Constitution explicitly reserves to individual states. His tone was dismissive, almost condescending, as if implying that her opposition stemmed from ignorance or misguided ideology. This isn't merely bad policy. It is a direct violation of constitutional principles, he emphasized. And honestly, I am quite surprised that anyone with a law degree would support such a blatant overstep. There was a subtle smirk in his voice, hinting at a belief that he had bested his opponent through sheer legal acumen. Crockett's reaction was subtle, but telling. The faint smile that played on her lips was not born of amusement, but of recognition. She was no stranger to confrontations like this. She had faced numerous prosecutors and opposing counsel who employed similar tactics: dismissiveness, condescension, attempts to undermine her credibility. Yet, she had always managed to maintain her composure and turn the tables in her favor. Behind the scenes, her team of advisors and legal experts had studied Durowitz's debating style meticulously. They knew he had a penchant for interrupting, asserting intellectual superiority, and sidestepping direct arguments in favor of rhetorical flourishes. They had prepared for this moment, analyzing his pattern of behavior to anticipate and counter his moves. What Durowitz did not realize was that Crockett had dedicated her weekend to intensive research, combing through his writings, speeches, and essays. Not only recent commentary on voting rights, but also archival materials from the 70s and 80s, original papers and opinion pieces that directly contradicted his present-day positions. Her investigative work was thorough. She even reached out to 3 former Harvard students who had studied under Durowitz, gaining valuable insights into his habitual argumentative techniques and potential weaknesses. Her strategy was clear. She aimed to demonstrate that his current stance was inconsistent with his prior intellectual positions, thereby undermining his credibility in real time. Meanwhile, upstairs in the control room, CNN's producers watched the live feed with intense focus. The segment had been framed as a serious discussion about policy, analyzing the implications of the Voting Rights Protection Act. However, as the exchange intensified with personal tension and pointed confrontations, the atmosphere turned far more compelling from a viewer's perspective. Recognizing the potential for viral content, the network's social media team quickly began clipping and uploading segments of Dershowitz's opening remarks and Crockett's calm rebuttals, knowing that these snippets would resonate widely across online platforms. The most dramatic moments promised to spark debate and engagement well after the broadcast concluded. the stakes of this debate extended beyond simply defending or opposing the Voting Rights Protection Act. For Dershowitz, the issue was deeply personal. He was increasingly focused on preserving his legacy as one of America's most influential legal minds of the later 20th and early 21st centuries. His reputation, built upon decades of scholarly work and legal triumphs, was being tested in this televised arena. He viewed this confrontation not just as a debate on legislation, but as a crucial chapter in his ongoing effort to affirm his intellectual authority and resilient influence within the legal community. For Crockett, the core mission was a matter of fundamental importance, demonstrating that a fresh, vibrant generation of legal professionals, diverse in background, deeply rooted in their communities, and unafraid to challenge the established power structures, had earned the right to be heard as equals when shaping the future of the nation's legal landscape. It was not merely about individual opinions or positions, but about affirming the legitimacy and voice of a new wave of attorneys committed to justice and equality. Rebecca, observing the unfolding exchange, shifted her focus to Crockett and addressed her directly, requesting her insights into the constitutional issues raised by the professor. Crockett quietly adjusted her papers, her demeanor shifting noticeably from courteous politeness to intense concentration. Her expression conveyed seriousness and readiness to engage on the matter. With calm confidence, she responded, "I would be pleased to clarify those constitutional concerns, Rebecca." Her tone was respectful, yet assertive, emphasizing her willingness to participate in the discussion. However, before diving into the legal specifics, Crockett felt it crucial to highlight a fundamental point for all viewers or listeners tuning in or observing the debate. She paused briefly to ensure her message was clear and understood. What she wanted everyone to grasp, Crockett explained with clarity and conviction, was that the authority to interpret the Constitution does not rest solely with the academic elites of prestigious universities, such as Ivy League professors, nor is it confined to legal scholars alone. Instead, she stressed that this interpretative power inherently belongs to every American citizen, especially those individuals and communities most directly impacted by constitutional translation into law and policy. This perspective underscored the democratic principle that constitutional understanding and application should be accessible and meaningful to all, not just a select few. At this point, Dershowitz, the professor, raised an eyebrow in mild surprise or perhaps mild irritation, perceiving the challenge perhaps as a slight to his authority. He opened his mouth as if to interject, likely to respond or to assert his own authority in legal interpretation. Yet, Crockett persisted, maintaining her composure and continuing her argument without interruption. Her voice grew firmer, more deliberate as she laid out her reasoning, making her stance unmistakably clear. She pointed out that her opponent's implication, that she somehow misunderstood the fundamentals of constitutional law, was unfounded. "Let's clarify that," Crockett said. She then proceeded to cite specific constitutional provisions to support her position. For example, she referenced Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, which explicitly grants Congress the authority to regulate federal elections, a power fundamental to the enforcement of voting rights and election processes across the nation. She further pointed out that the 14th and 15th Amendments empower Congress to take measures to protect voting rights and eliminate racial discrimination in voting practices. This is not just abstract constitutional theory, Crockett emphasized. It is the letter of the law, fixed and unambiguous. She acknowledged that Dershowitz, perhaps, was aware of this, but he appeared irritated or dismissive, shaking his head with visible frustration. He then claimed, "Congresswoman, I am fully aware of those constitutional provisions," and proceeded to mention the Supreme Court's rulings, citing Shelby County v. Holder as a key example. He asserted that the court had repeatedly confirmed that states possess significant authority over election administration, giving the impression that states hold the final say. Crockett responded without hesitation, referencing her own experience litigating voting rights cases directly impacted by Shelby County. "I am familiar with Shelby County," she said, having been involved in legal actions surrounding its implications. Her tone made it clear she was speaking from both legal knowledge and practical experience. She challenged the notion that the issue was merely about whether states had some degree of authority, arguing instead that the real question was whether that authority could be exploited to suppress or silence voters, particularly marginalized communities. This rebuttal visibly annoyed the professor further, tightening his facial expression and possibly signaling that her response was disrupting his narrative. Crockett, however, remained composed and continued her critique. "The key issue," she said, "is not simply whether states have the authority to conduct elections, but whether they can use that authority in ways that undermine citizens' voting rights, particularly in ways that violate the constitutional guarantee of equal protection under the law." Here, she pointed out that limiting voting options or imposing disproportionate restrictions on certain communities was not about ensuring ease of voting. It was a constitutional matter focused on fairness, equality, and the right to participate fully in the democratic process. Rebecca, who had been listening attentively, interjected to steer the debate toward specific legislative provisions. She suggested focusing on particular sections of a bill under discussion. She pointed out that the professor had criticized the requirement for a minimum number of early voting days, an element of recent voting reform efforts. Her question was straightforward. Why was this provision problematic? Durowitz leaned forward, seemingly ready to defend his position. "This is where I believe Congress oversteps its bounds," he declared. "States differ greatly in terms of their populations, resources, and logistical capabilities. Imposing a uniform federal rule disregards these differences and encroaches upon states' rights, what we call federalism." He called attention to statements from election officials in 17 states, warnings that such mandates could throw their logistical operations into chaos and undermine the system's efficiency. He accused Crockett of favoring ideological principles over practical considerations, implying her stance was disconnected from the real-world complexities of running elections. Crockett, however, patiently waited. When the opportunity arose, she calmly replied, "It's interesting you mention the opinions of election administrators. I actually have statements from officials in 23 states, including several Republicans, supporting these standards as both realistic and vital for electoral integrity." Turning directly toward Durowitz, she added, "Let's consider consistency across the board." She then invoked a previous work by the professor, his 1982 book titled Rights of the People, where he argued that federal voting standards might be necessary in cases where states demonstrate ongoing discrimination or repeated failures. Specifically, she recalled that he had endorsed the idea of national early voting standards in that publication. Her question was pointed. Has the Constitution changed since then, or just your stance on this issue? Her inquiry hinted at a deeper challenge, implying that his earlier support for federal intervention might still be valid unless constitutional or legal principles had shifted. This last point seemed to catch the professor off guard, as the camera briefly captured his surprise, an indication that Crockett's argument was effectively questioning the consistency of his position over the decades and perhaps encouraging viewers to reconsider the legal basis for federal voting standards in light of constitutional evolution or persistent principles. He had never anticipated that she would turn to his earlier work and quote him during the debate. The unexpected reference caught him off guard, causing him to shuffle his papers nervously, attempting to regain composure. In a calm, measured tone, he responded by emphasizing that academic understanding is a continually evolving process, driven by new evidence and insights. He reminded everyone that the landscape of voting laws and electoral procedures has undergone significant transformations since the 80s. The position he once held back then was shaped by particular concerns about certain states, which at the time appeared vulnerable or problematic in terms of voting security. Over the years, as more data and research accumulated, it became clear that constitutional principles, as well as practical policies, do not remain static. They shift and adapt in accordance with changing political, social, and legal climates. Crockett, observing this exchange, posed a question that seemed to probe the core of his stance. He found her inquiry intriguing, especially given her assertion of being an originalist, someone who claims to interpret the Constitution based on its original meaning at the time it was written. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as Rebecca shifted her focus, deliberately steering the discussion onto a contentious issue: voter identification laws. With deliberate emphasis, she proposed, "Let's examine the topic of voter ID laws more closely." Her tone subtly challenged her opponent's views. Critics of the proposed legislation argue that such laws threaten to weaken the foundational integrity of elections, impairing the voting rights of many eligible citizens. Crockett, clearly prepared, responded confidently, asserting that those critics failed to consider the extensive body of evidence indicating otherwise. Multiple studies, he elaborated, including comprehensive research conducted by the Brennan Center for Justice, demonstrate that voter impersonation fraud, the primary concern often cited, is virtually non-existent in practice. He emphasized that the real issue at hand is not fraudulent voting, but rather the substantial number of Americans, approximately 25 million, who find themselves unable to obtain the proper identification documents required for voting. Dersuit, sitting nearby, scoffed at this point, dismissing the credibility of the Brennan Center's findings. He argued that such an esteemed organization is far from impartial and suggested that the notion that millions of Americans simply cannot acquire IDs amounts to an insult to voters' intelligence. His tone conveyed skepticism and frustration. Crockett's expression hardened slightly at this condescension. He took a calm but firm tone, asking rhetorically, "Professor, have you ever represented anyone who was unable to cast a ballot because they lacked the financial resources to obtain the necessary identification?" He continued, "I have personally met elderly citizens who do not possess the required birth certificates, and I have spoken with low-wage workers who cannot afford to take time off from work to visit ID offices, which are often open only during hours incompatible with their schedules." His voice grew more pointed. "Labeling these difficulties as mere inconveniences or trivial obstacles is an insult that highlights the very kind of ivory tower attitude I mentioned earlier, disconnected from the real struggles faced by many voters." Noticing that he was beginning to lose ground in the argument, Durowitz, attempting to shift the narrative, changed tactics. He pointed out that personal anecdotes, though important, do not supersede the legal authority vested in individual states to establish measures aimed at safeguarding election integrity. He invoked a recent Supreme Court decision, affirming that reasonable voter identification laws are consistent with constitutional standards. When the court upheld Indiana's voter ID law in the case of Crawford versus Marion County, he explained, it acknowledged that evidence of actual voter burden was limited at that time. However, when compelling evidence surfaces showing that voting rights are being significantly disenfranchised, the constitutional standard is adjusted accordingly. Rebecca, seizing an opportunity to escalate the debate, produced another document, perhaps a prior publication or legal critique, and referenced a specific article she had co-authored in the Harvard Law Review back in 2005. She pointedly questioned Dersuit about her criticism of judges who, she claimed, conceal their policy motives behind selective and narrow readings of the Constitution. She argued that voter ID laws, according to her analysis, are often enacted under the guise of preventing fraud, but are ultimately motivated by partisan interests, efforts by certain states to suppress the votes of their opponents under the pretense of safeguarding electoral integrity. Dersuit quickly responded, asserting that her interpretation was taken out of context. "Am I truly misrepresenting your argument?" Crockett raised an eyebrow, challenging her. "Would you like me to read the full paragraph from your article, so everyone understands the context?" Rebecca swiftly intervened, suggesting that they take a short break to regroup. She proposed that when they returned, they would continue their discussion about voting rights and also include insights from viewers. As the cameras paused, Dersuit leaned toward his assistant with a look of frustration and urgency, whispering rapidly while pointing at his notes, clearly indicating that something in their line of argument had gone awry. His aide frantically searched through papers and documents, attempting to find the critical point or evidence that could rectify or bolster their position. Meanwhile, Crockett remained composed, calmly sipping from her water glass, observing the chaos with quiet confidence. A producer approached her politely, asking if she needed anything to aid her during the break. She replied evenly that she was fine, but also noted that perhaps they should check on the professor, hinting that they had not yet even reached the core contradictions lurking within his arguments. When the debate resumed, an unmistakable shift in energy was evident. Dersuit appeared more controlled, yet his demeanor conveyed a firm resolve. During the break, Crockett reflected on her own writings, not the selective quotations used in earlier exchanges, but her broader, more principled stance. Her core belief remains that election laws must carefully balance the twin imperatives of ensuring fair access for all eligible voters and maintaining the integrity of the electoral process. That, she contended, is all any responsible state is striving for, a goal rooted in the fundamental democratic ideal of giving everyone a fair chance to participate in choosing their leaders and shaping their future. With this conviction, she looked directly at her opponent and stated plainly, "Since we are discussing credentials and qualifications, let us be clear about the principles that underpin our approach to voting rights and election laws. Throughout my career, I have participated in and analyzed more than 50 cases before the Supreme Court, each one a profound opportunity to interpret and defend the fundamental principles enshrined in our Constitution. My role has often involved teaching constitutional law to thousands of the nation's most accomplished and talented attorneys, whose expertise and dedication to justice are well recognized. Given this solid background, with all due respect, your relatively brief period as a state legislator, covering just a few years, and your initial term as a member of Congress seem insufficient to position you as a qualified authority to lecture me on the intricacies of constitutional interpretation. Your perspective, while undoubtedly valuable, does not possess the depth of experience or the nuanced understanding that comes from decades of legal practice and scholarship in constitutional matters." The condescension that subtly colored his tone was unmistakable, and this was precisely the impression that many viewers observed, a tone that suggested an unwarranted sense of superiority and dismissiveness. It was clear that Crockett had been waiting for a moment such as this, prepared to confront the arguments with calm confidence. She began, addressing him directly. "Professor?" she said, her voice measured yet sharp, the same tone she employed in courtrooms when an opposing lawyer made a glaring mistake. "Perhaps now is the time we confront the elephant that is undeniably present in this room." She paused, ensuring her words resonated with clarity, then continued. "The core issue," Crockett emphasized with unwavering steadiness, "is that you are relying heavily on your academic credentials or past titles rather than engaging meaningfully with the substance of my argument." Her tone conveyed that this approach might be acceptable within the walls of a classroom, where students are concerned primarily about their grades and academic recognition, but it was entirely inappropriate in the context of our discussion. "This is not Harvard Law School, and I am not your student at this moment," she thought, her words deliberately pointed. Durowitz's expression grew visibly tighter, a sign of his growing discomfort. He attempted to respond, claiming, "I am addressing the substance of the matter." Crockett, undeterred, countered sharply, "You are the one bringing up historical quotes from the past." She pointed out that her intent was to demonstrate how his views had evolved or shifted over time. "I am highlighting," she explained, "how your position has changed to better understand your current stance." She then suggested, "Let's direct our focus more closely on today's discussion." She reminded him that he had previously asserted that states should have the authority to oversee and regulate election procedures, an assertion that, upon closer examination, raised significant questions. And she added, "Yet, in December of the year 2020, you argued that legislators were not bound by their state constitutions when they appointed presidential electors. That stance effectively undermines the validity of millions of votes across the nation." Crockett paused, then held up another document to emphasize her point. She quoted directly from his writings. "The Constitution gives this power to state legislators, not to states generally." Turning to him, she asked, "How do you reconcile that statement with your current concern for federalism and the authority of states?" Durowitz's face displayed a flicker of discomfort. He shifted unsteadily in his seat and explained, "That was a narrow legal argument concerning the Electors Clause, not a broad-based regulation of elections overall." Crockett nodded slightly, signaling her understanding, but maintaining her critical edge. "Is it truly only a narrow, isolated issue?" she inquired. "Because both topics, electors and general elections, are built upon the same core constitutional principle, the delicate balance between federal authority and states' rights, especially concerning the right to vote." She paused, giving him space to respond. "Yet, your interpretation appears to fluctuate depending on which political side benefits from your stance." Her words struck a nerve, and the audience murmured softly in response as Derskitz, reflecting a moment of embarrassment, showed signs of flushing visibly. This assertion, that his position was politically motivated rather than strictly constitutional, appeared to unnerve him. He responded indignantly, "That's absurd! My positions are grounded on constitutional analysis alone, not on political considerations." Crockett, sensing the opportunity, nodded minimally in acknowledgement, but pressed further. "Then, let us revisit and carefully examine that analysis," she suggested. "You frequently cite the case of Shelby County v. Holder to argue that federal oversight of state voting laws is unjustified, but in that very decision, Chief Justice Roberts reaffirmed Congress's authority to address and remedy voting discrimination, an authority this very bill aims to utilize." She leaned forward slightly, emphasizing her next point. "The difference, Professor, is that I have personally represented genuine voters impacted by the effects of Shelby County." She paused for effect. "I have witnessed polling stations being closed in minority communities, observed voter roll purges that disproportionately target eligible minority voters, and seen voter ID laws designed with meticulous precision to exclude certain groups from participating, practices that threaten the very fabric of our democratic process." Durowitz attempted to interject, perhaps to defend his position or to dispute her claims, but Crockett raised her hand politely to signal her desire to continue uninterrupted. "Please, I have listened respectfully to your arguments," she said, calmly but firmly, "and I expect the same respect in return." He fell silent, recognizing that her tone had shifted and that she was now addressing a more urgent, concrete reality rather than abstract legal theory. She went on, shifting her focus toward her experience in the Supreme Court. "You mentioned your extensive work before the highest court in our land, and I truly respect that," she acknowledged. "But I have also worked directly within state courts, where the practical effects of voting rights issues are most immediately felt. I have helped seniors, for example, reclaim their voting rights after bureaucratic hurdles, policies so complex and costly that they effectively disenfranchise our most vulnerable citizens." Her words carried a tone of genuine concern and conviction, highlighting her extensive first-hand experience with the real-world impact of legal and administrative decisions affecting the fundamental right to vote. In the complex interplay between abstract constitutional principles and immediate, tangible realities, there exist moments where theory sharply confronts practice. Such instances are far removed from theoretical debates within academic halls. Instead, they unfold in the heated rooms of legislative chambers, in arguments that have profound implications for people's daily lives and their fundamental right to vote. When she pulled out the draft of the proposed legislation, she emphasized that, contrary to some claims, this bill does not aim to federalize every single election in the country. Instead, it sets essential, minimum standards designed specifically to prevent the most egregious forms of voter suppression, those tactics that systematically hinder certain groups from exercising their voting rights. Crucially, she pointed out that individual states would still wield considerable freedom in how they choose to implement and enforce these standards. Their historical and legal authority over election procedures remains intact, as the bill merely establishes baseline requirements rather than dictating every detail. She underscored that the primary authority over election regulation belongs to state governments, as enshrined in the Constitution. Nevertheless, she highlighted that the proposed legislation oversteps that authority by micromanaging specific procedural elements, rules that traditionally have been within the domain of states. For example, she drew attention to Section 306 of the bill, which alone prescribes no fewer than 42 detailed mandates concerning early voting hours and locations. To call this a standard might be generous. It closely resembles an attempt at direct control, a turning of the key to an almost complete takeover of voting procedures across the nation. Sensing that this was the pivotal moment in the debate, Mitchell shifted her gaze toward Duruetitz, seeking his response. Her tone was measured but pointed, inviting the professor to articulate his perspective. Duruetitz, a seasoned academic and legal scholar, managed to compose himself, aware that this was more than mere words. It was about the very essence of constitutional authority. He acknowledged that the experiences and concerns expressed by the Congresswoman carried weight and deserved recognition. Still, he argued that these concerns could not override the clear stipulations of the Constitution, which explicitly assigns primary authority over election rules to the states, not to Congress. He contested the bill's provisions as an overreach, an attempt to regulate election procedures down to minute details, something he insisted was beyond the constitutional powers granted to Congress. He pointed out that the bill's specific mandates, especially those within Section 306, went beyond the constitutional scope and amounted to an overstep, a form of direct oversight control rather than the traditional standard-setting authority. To illustrate his point, he cited a proposal from the past, a measure he had previously supported back in 1991 during a congressional hearing. He mentioned that, in that instance, he had characterized similar federal measures as carefully tailored interventions that respected state sovereignty while safeguarding voting rights, thus striking a proper constitutional balance. The room grew tense as Crockett, an astute listener, displayed a transcript of Duruetitz's own words from that very hearing. The atmosphere seemed to pivot on that document, and Crockett turned to the audience with a deliberate pause before addressing the room. He read, "This is from your testimony before the House Judiciary Committee on the 14th day of March, 1991. Would you like me to read the full statement?" The unexpected request caught Duruetitz off guard, his reaction rapid and somewhat embarrassed as he blinked quickly, realizing that he did not have the full context at hand. He hesitated, indicating that he would need to see the entire transcript to confirm his memories. Crockett's gesture was patient and professional. He slid the document across the table, giving Duruetitz time to review it. The room remained quiet, every eye fixed on the unfolding exchange. As Duruetitz perused the pages and his expression changed from confident composure to visible confusion, and finally to quiet dismay, the truth became undeniable. His past words, the stance he once took, directly aligned with the claims Crockett had articulated. When he finally turned back toward the camera, Crockett explained, his tone emphasizing the importance of the evidence before them. This moment encapsulates her main concern, that too often discussions about voting rights are reduced to abstract legal theories, devoid of their real-world implications. Too many policymakers and legal experts treat vital protections as mere academic concepts, ignoring their concrete impact on individuals trying to cast their ballots. Equally troubling is the fact that the same legal scholars and advocates who once supported strong federal safeguards for voting rights, those very protections designed to ensure equality, now oppose similar measures. Their opposition, she argued, does not stem from any constitutional or legal defect. Instead, it arises from shifting political interests and strategic calculations. Attempting to recover, Duruetitz responded that, even if he had previously supported comparable provisions, it was essential to verify whether the constitutional framework had evolved over time through subsequent Supreme Court rulings. Her simple but pointed question was clear. Which specific ruling are you referring to? She pressed further, emphasizing that the landmark case of Shelby County held that Congress's authority to regulate voting practices was reaffirmed, provided that oversight criteria were appropriately updated and tailored. This ruling, she noted, explicitly recognized that Congress retains considerable power to address election discrimination, provided that actions are grounded in current, evidence-based needs, precisely what the bill under discussion aimed to do. Turning her attention back to Mitchell, she articulated her core argument. The debate over the legality of such legislation shouldn't be solely about abstract constitutional principles. Ultimately, the pressing question is whether every American citizen, regardless of their zip code, their schedule, or their physical abilities, has genuinely equal access to the ballot box. The Constitution's historical context and its textual provisions explicitly establish that Congress has the duty and the constitutional authority to act whenever that access is threatened. This responsibility is rooted not in semantics, but in the foundational principles of democracy and fairness. As she observed that Duruetitz's posture seemed increasingly uneasy, she noticed his shuffling of papers as the audience sat silently, awaiting clarification. Critics had argued that her emphasis on constitutional protections was merely emotional appeal, an accusation aimed at casting her as emotionally driven rather than grounded in legal logic. She raised an eyebrow in response, calmly challenging that notion. If that were true, then perhaps it was worth being precise about the legal bases involved. She proposed that they examine the relevant constitutional text itself, for instance, Article 1, Section 4, which explicitly states that the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be determined by each state's legislature. However, it also clearly grants Congress the authority to make or change regulations concerning elections at any time. This clause embodies a delicate balance. It recognizes the sovereignty of state legislatures while simultaneously empowering Congress to intervene when necessary to protect voting rights and ensure fairness across the nation. In this context, she was underscoring that the legislative provisions in the bill are firmly rooted in this constitutional text. They serve as a modern extension of the constitutional mandate to safeguard voting rights, especially in cases where state procedures might unjustly restrict access or disenfranchise certain groups. Her analysis aimed to demonstrate that, rather than overstepping, these federal measures are a legitimate exercise of Congress's constitutional powers, tools designed to uphold the integrity of the democratic process amid evolving challenges and threats. The discussion unfolded as a clear affirmation that Congress holds the ultimate authority to shape and regulate voting rights within the United States. The speaker elaborated by emphasizing the significance of the constitutional amendments, the 14th and 15th, that explicitly empower Congress with such authority. She explained that the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, alongside the 15th Amendment's prohibition against racial discrimination in voting, both contain specific enforcement provisions. These provisions serve as direct grants of power, explicitly authorizing Congress to pass legislation deemed necessary to ensure the protections intended by these amendments. Throughout American legal history, the Supreme Court has consistently recognized and upheld this constitutional authority. Most recently, in the case of Brnovich versus the Democratic National Committee, the court reiterated and reinforced Congress's power to establish standards for voting rights, even while ruling on Arizona's election regulations. This case served as a contemporary reminder that Congress's authority in this realm remains firm and well supported by constitutional precedent. As the presentation proceeded, the atmosphere in the studio grew quiet, almost tense, as Crockett systematically addressed and dismantled Dershowitz's constitutional objections. With remarkable clarity and authority, he cited relevant case law, referenced historical legal precedents, and pointed precisely to specific provisions within the legislation under discussion. His approach was not theoretical. It was rooted in practical understanding derived from extensive experience and familiarity with the constitutional framework. It became apparent that Crockett's mastery of the legal material was more than superficial. Dershowitz, attempting to interrupt several times, was met with smooth and authoritative counter-responses each time. Crockett demonstrated superior command not only of the law, but also of the intricate details embedded within the bill. His calm confidence highlighted his deep knowledge, and it was clear that his growing frustration was restrained, yet perceptible. Eventually, in a final effort to make his primary point, Dershowitz attempted to raise what he believed to be a critical issue. He addressed the Congresswoman directly, expressing concern that she might not fully grasp the potential unintended consequences of the legislation. He suggested that Section 502 could, in his view, diminish the voting power of minority groups in certain local elections, raising a warning flag about possible negative impacts. Crockett's expression softened into a slight smile, indicating a poised confidence. He responded evenly, "Professor, I'm afraid that's not quite correct." He explained that the bill in question does not contain a section numbered 502. Instead, the legislation comprises only 428 sections. The room suddenly fell into complete silence. Realizing what had happened, Dershowitz hurriedly shuffled through his papers, a look of dawning comprehension crossing his face. It became evident that he had confused this bill with another piece of legislation, a serious mistake for someone claiming to be an expert in constitutional law. He muttered an apology, speaking more quietly now, acknowledging the error. "I meant Section 402, he corrected himself. Crockett responded with calm professionalism. "Section 402 concerns ballot drop boxes, and it has nothing to do with minority vote dilution. Perhaps you are thinking of House Resolution 272 from the last Congress. That was a different bill entirely." His words captured precisely the unfolding reality that Dershowitz's points had been based on incomplete understanding. Despite his impressive credentials and reputation, Dershowitz had entered the debate without thoroughly reading or analyzing the legislation, instead relying on established talking points and assumptions. Crockett, in contrast, who had even helped draft parts of the bill, displayed an in-depth understanding and accuracy in every response he gave. Recognizing the importance of the moment, the moderator, Mitchell, turned to Dershowitz with a composed and respectful tone. "Professor, considering the clarifications provided by the Congresswoman, do you wish to revise or reconsider any aspect of your position on this legislation?" His usual confidence seemed somewhat shaken as he responded tentatively. "I still harbor constitutional concerns, but I must admit that some of my criticisms may have stemmed from outdated or incorrect information. I will need to revisit and review the full text more carefully." Crockett nodded graciously. "I appreciate your honesty, Professor. I would be glad to present a comprehensive analysis that demonstrates how each section of the bill aligns with established constitutional principles. Perhaps, after reviewing the details, we can agree on the importance of safeguarding every American's right to vote without unnecessary challenges." Her tone remained calm, composed, and generous, the kind of demeanor that highlighted a deep understanding and respect for the democratic process. It also served as a stark contrast to Dershowitz's slightly defensive stance, which seemed more rooted in reputation and preconceived notions than in the detailed legal realities. As the tense and highly charged debate reached its conclusion, it became painfully obvious to everyone observing from afar that they had just witnessed a pivotal moment, one that marked a profound shift in the landscape of America's legal discourse. This was not merely a routine exchange of opinions or a standard political confrontation. Rather, it was a defining instance where the long-standing notion that a person's reputation alone could serve as an unassailable foundation for authority was fundamentally being challenged. In that fleeting yet historic moment, the prevailing understanding of influence and credibility was undergoing a dramatic re-evaluation, signaling the beginning of a new era in legal and political debates in the United States. Within mere minutes of the segment's broadcast on CNN, a stream of swiftly edited clips showcasing Crockett's meticulous and strategic rebuttal flooded social media platforms worldwide. The rapid spread was unprecedented, and an especially notable clip, her decisive dissection of Durowitz's erroneous reference to a fictitious legal provision labeled Section 502, became a viral sensation, surging past 1 million views in less than an hour. This particular moment not only captivated millions, but also sparked a nationwide conversation, turning Crockett's incisive retort into a trending topic across various social networks. The phrase, "Crockett clapback," and the phrase, "D-wrong Section 502" quickly gained momentum and dominated online discourse, generating countless shares, comments, and debates from commentators spanning the entire political spectrum. People from differing viewpoints weighed in on the event. Among conservative legal analysts, prominent figures like Andrew McCarthy took to social media to commend Crockett's performance. He posted a tweet stating, "No matter what stance you hold regarding the bill itself, Crockett just delivered an exemplary display of thorough preparation and mastery of the facts." On the opposing side, others like Durowitz faced criticism for their fluff and lack of specificity. Meanwhile, on the cable news front, MSNBC's host Rachel Maddow started her evening program with a dramatic comparison, saying, "What we just witnessed was the legal equivalent of David defeating Goliath," emphasizing the precision and sharpness of Crockett's challenge. She ended her introduction by remarking that this time, instead of a simple slingshot, Crockett had employed surgical accuracy and strategic acumen to triumph in the debate. Back behind the scenes at CNN, the producers, who had originally anticipated a standard policy discussion, were now frantically working to capitalize on what had rapidly become the most watched segment of the month for the network. As views skyrocketed overnight, they organized and prepared a special broadcast titled "The New Defenders: Rising Voices, Reshaping Legal Debate." In this program, Crockett's profile was prominently featured, including shots of her in her Manhattan apartment, where she appeared poised and confident. Meanwhile, at the higher echelons of the legal community, Alan Dershowitz faced one of the most significant setbacks of his lengthy professional career. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, students, and journalists alike, each seeking his immediate comment or insight regarding the fiery exchange. Within Harvard Law School, the incident ignited a flurry of discussions on internal message boards, with many professors noting that Crockett had employed the same Socratic method that Dershowitz himself, in earlier times, had used to challenge and engage his students. The debate among academics was intense, with some highlighting the fact that Crockett's incisive questioning echoed Dershowitz's own teaching style, yet used in a new, sharper form. By early morning, Dershowitz felt compelled to issue a formal statement. In his carefully worded message, he acknowledged that while he personally maintained constitutional reservations about certain federal election laws, he also recognized that Congresswoman Crockett displayed a commanding grasp of the subject matter. His statement expressed respect for her arguments and emphasized the importance of having well-prepared advocates representing diverse perspectives in public discourse. Though crafted with diplomacy, the tone of the message was widely interpreted as an attempt at damage control, softening the blow of his earlier setback and trying to preserve his reputation amid the unexpected turn of events. For Crockett herself, the aftermath of her viral moment was nothing short of transformative. Her office was suddenly flooded with interview requests from the most prominent national networks, eager to feature her insights on this pivotal topic. Her social media following experienced a meteoric rise. It more than tripled overnight, as thousands of new followers eagerly engaged with her posts and commentary. Recognizing her burgeoning influence, leaders within the House Democratic Caucus invited her to take the podium for a crucial press conference the very next day, where she was to discuss voting rights legislation. This opportunity further cemented her position as a rising star within the party. Even more remarkably, 3 members of Congress, previously undecided about the bill, reached out to her personally to express their support, having been influenced by her arguments and evident familiarity with the issues. The momentum that had seemed so unlikely just days before now appeared unstoppable. The political landscape was shifting swiftly, and the prospects for passing the legislation, once considered a long shot, now seemed increasingly promising. Across the landscape of legal blogs, academic forums, and think tank discussions, analysis and commentary proliferated at an extraordinary pace. One Yale University law professor wrote an op-ed emphasizing the significance of the event, stating, "Crockett demonstrated that a combination of lived experience and diligent legal scholarship can yield a far more accurate and compelling interpretation of constitutional principles than abstract theoretical arguments alone." Such praise underscored the growing recognition of the value in practical, experiential knowledge paired with rigorous legal reasoning. In response to the burgeoning debate, Georgetown Law announced an upcoming panel discussion titled Credentials versus Substance: Rethinking Legal Authority in Public Discourse. Civil rights organizations swiftly seized the moment, building upon Crockett's rising profile by framing her success as a demonstration of the importance of authentic voice and substantive expertise in shaping effective legal arguments and policy discussions. This series of developments signified a moment of reflection and reassessment, highlighting that true authority in legal discourse was no longer solely rooted in reputation or academic pedigree, but increasingly rooted in clarity, preparedness, and the genuine understanding of lived realities and constitutional principles. The statements issued by both the NLAACP and the Lawyers' Committee for Civil Rights Under Law highlighted the significance of Crockett's arguments, emphasizing how her reasoning reaffirmed the fundamental constitutional principles that serve as the backbone for federal voting protections in the United States. These organizations underscored that her passionate defense of voting rights was rooted in well-established constitutional doctrine, thus reinforcing the legitimacy and enduring importance of the legal foundations that uphold democratic participation. Meanwhile, activists across states such as Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona reported a noticeable increase in the number of volunteers signing up for their voter education initiatives. Many of these individuals explicitly pointed to Crockett's fervent and articulate defense of voting rights as their primary inspiration, seeing her words as a catalyst that rekindled their motivation to participate actively in efforts aimed at safeguarding the integrity of elections. This surge in volunteer enthusiasm reflected a broader sense of empowerment sparked by her stance, galvanizing those who see the fight for voting rights as essential to the nation's democratic health. At the same time, efforts from conservative media outlets sought to reshape or diminish the impact of Crockett's arguments. For example, Fox News host Laura Ingraham contended that her referencing of Section 502 of the relevant legal code did not, in her view, sufficiently address the wider constitutional issues at stake. She attempted to frame her critique as a focus on legal technicalities, implying that the broader constitutional questions were either misunderstood or deliberately avoided. Nonetheless, even among some of her colleagues in conservative circles, acknowledging the strength of the legal substance was common. In particular, former Judge Andrew Empoliano admitted that while Dershowitz relied heavily on his reputation and prior legal standing, Crockett had distinguished herself through careful preparation and a solid grasp of constitutional principles. He recognized that her arguments resonated in terms of legal accuracy, even if viewers might not have initially appreciated their depth. Just 3 days after the contentious CNN segment, an unexpected event occurred that caught many by surprise. Alan Dershowitz, the seasoned and well-known attorney, requested a private meeting with Congresswoman Crockett. He arrived alone, without cameras or staff present, entering her office on Capitol Hill with an unexpectedly modest demeanor. When he addressed her directly, his tone was markedly different from the confrontational style displayed during their televised exchange. He began by explicitly stating that he had taken the time to thoroughly review the bill in question. While he continued to harbor some reservations about certain provisions, he felt compelled to acknowledge that her legal reasoning, specifically her constitutional interpretation, was largely sound. He paused for a moment before adding that her emphasis on the real-world implications of legislation had also made a strong impression on him. "Theory without application," he admitted, "holds little true value in shaping meaningful policy." Crockett, demonstrating grace and humility in her victory, responded warmly and with genuine professionalism. She extended an invitation for Dershowitz to join her in co-authoring an op-ed that would explore their shared principles concerning voting rights, even as they recognized that they approached the issue from slightly different perspectives. She emphasized that the purpose of such an article was to demonstrate to the public that constitutional interpretation need not be inherently partisan or divisive. People deserve to see that honest debate over legal principles can occur across ideological lines, she suggested. After some reflection, Dershowitz agreed to her proposal. Together, they crafted a compelling piece, published under the compelling headline, "Finding Constitutional Common Ground on Voting Rights," which appeared in the Washington Post. This joint article quickly gained widespread attention, not for divisiveness, but for promoting a meaningful dialogue that bridged generational and ideological divides. In that article, Crockett and Dershowitz emphasized that when political discourse shifts its focus to the substance of constitutional principles rather than mere status or superficial authority, democracy itself is strengthened. Their message was clear: evidence and reasoned debate serve as the bedrock of a healthy democratic society. When discussions center on the core issues supported by constitutional law, rather than on partisan posturing, the democratic process flourishes. For Jasmine Crockett personally, this exchange represented a pivotal moment in her career, not merely as a member of Congress, but as a voice committed to elevating vital issues affecting voters and the constitutional framework. The encounter marked a significant step in her mission to foster a more substantive, respectful dialogue about voting rights and constitutional interpretation. In the week immediately following her appearance on CNN, Crockett received invitations from eminent universities such as Harvard, Yale, and Howard Law School, asking her to speak about her experiences and insights. Her influence was evident as enrollment figures in voting rights courses across the nation spiked dramatically in the subsequent semester, reflecting a renewed interest among students eager to understand and engage with constitutional law. Perhaps even more meaningful was the outpouring of messages Crockett received from a diverse array of young legal professionals, law students, and especially women of color working within the legal community. Many expressed that her courage and clarity served as a beacon of hope and inspiration. For instance, a second-year law student from Michigan wrote to her, sharing that Crockett had demonstrated that it was possible to stand firm and speak truth to power without compromising one's integrity or authentic identity. "Your example showed us that we do not need to minimize our experiences or our perspectives to gain respect from authority," the student reflected. Meanwhile, in Washington, the political landscape continued to evolve as the aftermath of this debate unfolded. Several Republican senators reached out privately to discuss the potential for bipartisan compromise legislation focused on establishing new standards for early voting. Although some policy disagreements persisted, the tone shifted away from ideological confrontation towards practical dialogue aimed at solving tangible issues. This transition represented a significant area where Crockett's skills, her ability to focus on pragmatic solutions, began to play a vital role. At a Congressional Black Caucus meeting, congressmen and women commended Crockett for her influential role. Congressman James Clyburn, in particular, emphasized that her efforts had transcended the typical legislative debates. "You didn't just win a simple debate," he remarked, "but you helped pave the way for a more constructive, solutions-oriented approach to voting rights legislation, demonstrating that principled dialogue can lead to meaningful progress." 6 weeks prior, a pivotal moment had occurred that would forever alter the way the nation approached discussions surrounding voting rights and the broader realm of democratic participation. That instance marked the beginning of a profound shift in public discourse, a change so impactful that it altered established narratives and set a new standard for what meaningful dialogue could look like in the modern era. From that point onward, the manner in which issues related to voting rights would be addressed and debated took on a new character, one characterized by greater clarity, greater confidence, and a deeper engagement with core constitutional principles. It was precisely through this transformative event that lasting change in societal conversations was sparked. Following this watershed moment, within a span of just over a month and a half, a revised version of the Voting Rights Protection Act emerged as a formal legislative proposal. This bill managed to pass through the House of Representatives, garnering support from members across the political spectrum, a rare feat in a deeply divided legislative environment. The bipartisan backing demonstrated a shared recognition of the importance and urgency of safeguarding voting rights, despite ongoing political tensions. While uncertainty still enveloped its prospects in the upper chamber, the Senate, the momentum gained during those crucial weeks was undeniable. Few could have predicted such a leap forward before the event that made headlines and captured nationwide attention. The sudden visibility of a particular viral moment involving Congresswoman Crockett played an instrumental role in shifting public opinion and legislative priorities. Experts in political analysis and legal scholarship widely credited Crockett with playing a central role in reshaping the nation's understanding of both the constitutional foundations of voting rights and the practical implications of their protection. Her actions and words prompted a reevaluation not only of legal frameworks, but also of how ordinary citizens and policymakers alike perceived their roles in defending democracy. The broader media landscape quickly seized upon the incident, turning it into a touchstone case study for the evolving nature of authority within public discourse. No longer was expertise or credentials the sole marker of influence. Instead, what mattered increasingly was the depth of preparation, the authenticity of lived experience, and the moral conviction behind one's views. This new era saw the emergence of a generation of voices demanding recognition, not based on traditional status or institutional affiliations, but grounded in their insightful perspectives and rigorous understanding of complex issues. Across the country, viewers and listeners alike bore witness to a confrontation where the exchange of ideas unfolded not merely as a debate, but as a rare instance of genuine intellectual engagement on a live platform. This moment transcended partisan divisions and touched upon something more profound: a continuing national conversation about who truly holds authority in a democracy. It was about the fundamental question of representation, not only at the ballot box, but also within the realms of public discourse and policy-making processes. Later, reflecting thoughtfully with her team, Crockett explained her perspective, emphasizing the true purpose behind her bold stance. She shared that her intent was never to embarrass Professor Durowitz, but to reinforce a principle essential to democracy, that every voter's right to participate must be safeguarded through a careful blend of constitutional interpretation and real-world application. She articulated that when legal theory and lived experience intersect, that intersection becomes the foundation where justice begins to take shape and take form. Her words underscored a core belief that meaningful change often occurs at the intersection of law and everyday reality. The dialogue between Crockett and Dershowitz soon became a subject of study in universities nationwide, spanning fields such as communications, law, and political science. It served as a striking illustration of how thorough preparation, deep expertise, and unwavering moral conviction could challenge even the most established authority figures. This episode was a vivid reminder to the country that in a healthy, functioning democracy, ideas must stand on their intrinsic merit, rejecting any tendency to be elevated solely based on titles or institutional authority. Instead, the strength of an argument depended on its substance, not on the reputation of those who presented it. As debates over voting rights and democratic participation continued to unfold across the United States, one undeniable truth emerged from these events. A new voice had made a permanent entry onto the national stage. This voice embodied confidence, readiness, and courage, traits that served as the strongest responses to attempts at humiliation or marginalization. It demonstrated that the most effective way to confront attempts at silencing or discrediting is to approach challenges with solid preparation, moral conviction, and steadfast self-assurance. Should you find this detailed account of the Crockett-Dershowitz confrontation to be insightful and thought-provoking, it is worth reflecting on the significance of such moments for the nation's political fabric. Recognize that these exchanges, though seemingly confrontational, often reveal deeper currents shaping the future of democracy. They reaffirm the importance of awake, informed citizenry, capable of engaging in spirited but respectful debates that ultimately serve to strengthen democratic processes. Such instances exemplify how courage and thoroughness can serve as powerful tools rather than mere weapons in the ongoing effort to protect and advance the fundamental rights of every voter, not just in theory, but in everyday practice. This brief exploration underlines a vital principle. In the rich tapestry of American democracy, the most lasting changes often stem from moments of honest, vigorous debate, when individuals stand firm in their convictions and articulate them clearly. This episode serves as a testament to the resilience of democratic ideals when they are defended by voices unafraid to challenge prevailing norms, armed with knowledge, integrity, and an unwavering belief in justice. The turning points like these remind us all that true strength lies in confidence, thorough preparation, and the moral courage to speak truthfully, even in the face of opposition.